the Subcommittee on Trade is recognized.
First time I had a hearing on trade, U.S. Trade Representative Barshevsky came in and testified that if we could find a deal that increased our exports by $1 billion and increased our imports by $2 billion, that would be a $3 billion win. Those who constantly bleat exports mean jobs should at least follow up with imports cost jobs. Now, my colleague from Virginia who has left talks about trade adjustment assistance. Let's find a single Republican member of this House that will say that we can appropriate money for trade adjustment assistance without cutting money on health care, education, and other domestic priorities. We will have to divert the money that we're spending to meet the challenges our families face now in order to deal with the additional challenges that the Korea and other free trade agreements would bring. The old days of trade adjustment assistance coming from magic money, that's gone. And any Democrat that talks about trade adjustment assistance needs to find a Republican that says it won't mean cuts in health and education. Now, some 20 minutes has been spent in this room criticizing my opening statement. Let me respond. I said goods that are 65% made in China come into this country duty-free under the agreement. None of my critics disagree at all. I say that the 35% finishing work done in South Korea doesn't have to be done by South Korean workers. It can be done by Chinese guest workers living in barracks. Nobody disagrees. Let the record show. And I say that while those Chinese guest workers have to be paid the South Korean minimum wage, the employer can deduct for barracks living and bring that wage down to virtually nothing. None of the critics have a response. Then I talk about goods 65% made in North Korea. Leave Kaesong aside, any part of North Korea. And we're told, well, American executive orders prevent us from allowing those goods into our country. True. The rest of my argument was ignored. Once we bar those goods at our ports, we're in violation of the agreement. What happens when America is found or is threatened with successful sanctions because we're in violation of our trade agreements? The executive branch backs down. That's what happened with the Iran Sanctions Act. The European oil companies were in violation. The Europeans threatened us with WTO, and even to this day, not a single European oil company has faced the slightest sanction under the Iran trade agreement. We've seen this movie before. We know that the executive branch will back down, but let's say they don't. Let's say they have backbone. Let's say the bill that I've co-sponsored with the chairwoman's bill actually passes and becomes law. Then we will have the backbone to violate this agreement. The Koreans can then impose sanctions and take away all the benefits. They may even target Mr. Greenblatt's firm and say his wires are among those sanctions. So any concession the South Koreans made in the agreement can then be taken back. No disagreement with any of that. It's not whether the goods come in. That would have to be decided by the executive branch, or if we pass the bill, by Congress. It's whether we face sanctions when we bar those North Korean goods. Under the rules of origin, the South Korean seller has a right to bring in the goods, 65% made in North Korea, 35% made in South Korea. Now let's talk about these special labor camps. What does Annex 22B say? None of my critics actually quote the language or cite the provision. Legislative approval is required. Now, what does that mean? Well, for the Libya action, legislative approval meant talking to key congressional leaders. Sometimes congressional approval means asking Congress whether they want to pass a resolution of disapproval when, say, a regulation is adopted. So I asked the administration and the proponents, why not have clarifying language on this? The answer was, we'll give you clarifying language in a press release, but nothing legally binding. Why? Because in Korea, they are telling their legislature that this will be handled and Kaesong goods will come in and South Korean companies will make billions of dollars paying $8 a month to workers and selling into the U.S. market. So I think that most of what I said in my opening statement was not even criticized at all in the 20 minutes taken by my critics. 65% China, 35% Chinese workers.
Chairman. Mr. Rohrabacher is recognized, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations.
As I said in my opening statement, I'll be very interested in finding out who is correct in their assessment. And let me just note that Mr. Sherman, over the years, I have found that he is very diligent and very responsible. And so I pay attention to when he says something like this, and I want to know who's right, and whether Mr. Sherman's right or Mr. Royce is right. Maybe our friend from the chamber can tell us, and then I'll ask our friend from Labor to tell us. Is Mr. Sherman right that if you have items that are coming to us from South Korea that are made 65% in North Korea, that they are not barred from entry into our market?
I'm going to rely on what the administration says, which is that they have no intention of allowing any importation of goods.
I don't care about the intention.
Well,
intention is the biggest weasel word that we.
I'm not responsible, obviously. For
in your reading of the agreement.
My reading
is Mr. Sherman right that
my reading of the agreement is that there will be no importation of goods or services or technology from North Korea. Permitted.
Will the gentleman yield?
I certainly will.
My point is that if we stick to our guns the way the administration intends, then we will be subject to sanctions by the South Koreans, and we will lose much of the benefit of the agreement.
Is that correct?
His point is, do we have an enforcement mechanism, not whether or not the agreement itself allows for the import.
No, if we stop those goods, will we then be in violation of our understanding of a current status quo agreement with Korea?
I'm going to let the U.S. government.
Would the gentleman yield?
Hold on. You're with the chamber.
I think that is a good question for the U.S. government, not for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
I think that when we're asking how policy is going to affect our economy, I think you're shirking your responsibility, just like the Chamber shirks its responsibility in trying to deal when the Chinese manipulate the currency so that we have a flow of wealth into a communist dictatorship like China. So, listen, I like the Chamber a lot for a lot of what you do, but sometimes on these trade issues, we end up seeing the American people not being represented by what you're saying, but certain business interests. And as far as I'm concerned, what's happening with China has been a disaster for the American worker. 3 million of them are out of jobs because of this. What about labor? Do you agree with what Mr. Sherman's saying?
I think there's a lot of troubling uncertainty in the agreement about the treatment of goods from Kaesong, and that some of that is deliberate on the part of the South Korean government. The agreement does not actually mention products from North Korea. It doesn't say they can or can't come in. I think that creates a problem, the problem that Congressman Sherman talked about. It is certainly the U.S. government's intention not to allow products from North Korea to come in, and we have sanctions policy that would, as was quoted by Mr. Royce.
Intention.
Would the gentleman yield on this?
No, I want to, excuse me, but I'm trying to get to the bottom of it.
No, so I think a problem
Intention
is
not as important as what the outcome will be. Mr. Sherman's will certainly agree that intention, what is the actual outcome? Is it that we are going to be put into a position that we'll have to act because we are then in violation of another agreement with South Korea?
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will yield to Mr. Sherman.
Under the agreement, a product that is 65% made in North Korea, but 35% made in South Korea, is a South Korean good.
Correct.
And has a right to come into the United States.
Is that your reading of this agreement?
That is not my reading, but it's not my call. It's the administration to defend or describe the terms of the rules of origin.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will.
Part of the agreement is an annex that both parties have agreed to deem the Kaesong industrial complex a South Korean outward processing zone on the Korean peninsula. That's what this Annex 22B addresses. It sets a process out where both sides have to agree. And you're right. The intentions are not the answer. It's what is the law and the rules. And for us to deem that, Congress would have to sign off. It is in our power to stop that from happening.
Mr. Rohrbacher's request.
I would let me just suggest I am listening very closely, and I in principle I'd like to support the free trade agreement. I believe in free trade between free people, but if Mr. Sherman is correct, this isn't going to work to the benefit of us, and it may work to the benefit of North Korea, a vicious dictator.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Rohrbacher, whose time has expired, and I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Sears.
Mr. Sears, can I have 15 seconds of your time?
Absolutely.
Mr. Berman was talking about the Kaesong industrial plant. We were earlier talking about all of North Korea. Any good made anywhere in North Korea, whether we do anything special with Kaesong or not, if it's 65% made in North Korea, 35% made in South Korea, it counts as a South Korean product under this agreement. I yield to the gentleman from New Jersey.